All right, recording started. So you're gonna have to help me through this because I don't remember exactly how it goes. Is it good day, good morning, good evening, wherever you are? Thanks for joining. Is that a good Soltish impression there?
She would be proud.
Welcome everyone to July 29th edition of the SIG CLI meeting. We got a couple items on the agenda here. Add your names to the attendees and add any items to the topics. I think we're gonna have a little bit of a light day today, so that'll give us maybe a chance to dig into some of these topics a little more than we otherwise would. Looks like there's no announcements. Anyone need to announce anything or want to announce anything that didn't make it to the notes? All right, moving on. Topics. Actually, I'm going to move off Mache's topic here because he's not here today. Eddie, you're up.
I think I'm going to punt this one over to Brian.
Sure. Yeah. At the last bug scrub, one of the issues we looked at was 882, which is implementing kubectl command line completion using Go instead of Bash, and this is really taking advantage of what. So the idea of it originally, this issue was taking advantage of what was in Cobra 1.0. Let's see. Last meeting, I guess, Philip mentioned that there's another completion that's being used in Kustomize called Posner Complete, and that it's working well for Kustomize. So the question was, which direction should we go in? So I think, we kind of said, let's go away for a week and kind of look at this. And admittedly, I didn't take a week to look at it, but I did look at it a few times during the week. I mean, I have a few thoughts. I know Night 42, Jean Zhang is looking at working on this issue. And so I think he's probably looking for some direction. I think he's working on the Cobra version of it right now, but I did give him a heads up that we talked about it in the bug scrub and that we were gonna discuss it today. So anybody have any thoughts on the difference between like Cobra and Posner Complete? Besides, I mean, I have a few, but I'm interested to hear what other people think. So, I mean, I guess I'll get started. I mean, I think from my point of view, I mean, they both look very similar in functionality. At this point, I think in the past, Posner was probably a much better choice because it supported other shells better. But I guess when I looked at it, I was thinking, well, should we bring in this other dependency, or should we try to use Cobra, which we already have a dependency on, and see if that works first? And if it doesn't meet the needs, then switch over to Posner. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I know we had the original author of the completion chime in. I think they also wrote it in Helm as well, and they seemed pretty stoked on the current implementation with Cobra. But admittedly, I haven't even looked at Posner before.
Yeah, that's Mark Kuzam, I think.
I can talk about I did the Posner one for Kustomize, and so I can talk about the things I liked about it. Now, those might not be, those may be addressed in the Cobra version now, and I think Brian and I got a chance to talk about this offline or in Slack. What I like about the Posner completion is that all the completion is done inside the Go binary itself. So what gets added to your bash RC or your ZSH RC or whatever is just an invocation of the actual command. So it's like kube control, right? And so this means, like, for instance, when you update the binary, like it automatically updates the completions. The completion code is like pretty simple from the perspective of the bash file. Like there's just a single line there and not functions. So those are the things I really liked about it. I'm not sure what the latest on the Cobra situation is.
Yeah, I mean, in my bash RC, it's a one-liner. To put it in, I mean, I'll paste it in the chat window here, but basically, I just have this in my bash RC to get completion. But I mean, I know what you're saying, that, I mean, because this really just spits out a big giant bunch of bash. And yeah, I mean, one thing that I forgot to mention, and I'm not arguing either way, I really don't care too much. I guess I'm just trying to make the case of whether we should deviate from where we're at now. But is that people already have this in their bash RC. So if we switch over to something different, it won't work anymore for them. So everybody will have to, and maybe I mean, it's a one-time thing, but everybody will have to switch over to the new way of adding completions.
I see. Because the new Cobra one just uses the same, spit out a bunch of bash, but it does it using the same command, so it's like kind of a seamless upgrade.
I guess
How does
the
that
context.
work?
Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
I was gonna say, how does this work for like writing your own completions, right? So if you want to do like completions of like the pods, like complete autocomplete pod names or autocomplete namespace names, where it would read the name of or would lead the list of pods from the server. Like, is that supported?
Yeah, that's and that's supported in Posner as well. That's the predictions, I think they call it in that. But and that's one of the major improvements in Cobra 1.0 is the ability to write those dynamic completions using Go. And right now we just have a whole bunch of custom written bash that we have in the kubectl project, or in the kubectl part of the project, that spits out a bunch of customized handwritten bash. But the advantage in Cobra 1.0 is you can write that in Go, and then I guess they have hooks that call your Go functions to retrieve the completions.
I mean, I don't feel super strongly about it. Like this doesn't seem like if we switch to this new thing, if we switch to the new Cobra one, it seems like a clear improvement over what we have, like you were saying, with kind of a backwards compatible approach. And we can, if it is great, then leave it and way to go. Or if we're like, oh, that maybe down the line it doesn't do quite what we need and Posner does, then I think we can like swap it out at that point in time too. It's not like a one-way door, like, because we're not breaking backwards compatibility now. Like, it doesn't seem to. I'm not sure there's a strong case for breaking it for Posner.
I want to give the context here. So a lot of the bash completion currently has to be manually implemented. I don't know if everyone knows how bash completion works, but it's kind of like magic. You basically like get a magic bash function call during a completion, and you set an environment variable or a bash variable to like comp reply or something, and that magically populates your bash completion. So it's like a pretty inelegant solution. And the issue is that a lot of our resources have to have custom bash functions created currently to do that. And it's just very tedious. It's not difficult at all. It's just a ton of like bash parsing and scripting. And so I think that the reason this all came up is these two options give us a way to avoid doing all that in bash, and Go will just magically generate it all for us. Is that accurate, Brian?
Yeah, I think so.
So So where we're at is like we do need to pick a solution because people keep opening random issues that are like, oh, we need bash completion for this one resource.
And it's actually the other shells. It's Z shell and fish that are driving this. Bash completion actually works pretty well in kubectl right now. So that's the other kind of tricky thing about this is we want to make sure that we don't break it for the things that are working well. Yeah.
No, but it's like randomly, right? So one of them was when you're execing into a pod or something, and the -o flag just doesn't complete the pod names, but some of the -o flags complete the pod names or something like that.
Well, and that's a really tricky one because I think the pod completion assumes that you can specify multiple pods, so it doesn't know that you've already given one pod and now you're trying to complete a container.
Some of this stuff is going to be complex to get right. For instance, like if you want to autocomplete the short name for a CRD in kubectl get, right? Like that, the only way to do that is look at the CRDs installed in that cluster, find their short names, and then give it as a suggestion, right? So I think there's going to be like a long tail of stuff where it's going to be like custom. And one thing we're trying to avoid, right, is we don't want to write that custom logic per shell, right? There should be one piece of Go that says, here's the custom CRD things, and then the completion generator, right, should figure out what that looks like for each individual shell. It sounds like that's supported in both approaches. Then there's like the short, like there's just kind of the fundamentals of stuff that people expect should work, right? Where it's like the built-in commands, right? And then there's going to be, I think, stuff that is kind of in between, right? Like the acceptable values for a flag which accepts an enum, right? Like autocomplete, whatever the enumeration of that flag is, right? And that one is like technically statically known, so it's not like quite as hard as the CRD case, but it's probably not expressed in the Cobra like flag, right? The flag itself may not express what the enumeration values are, so it's going to have to be hard coded. Versus like the command names and the flag names, you can actually just look at the Cobra structure itself, and you like Cobra should be able to figure that out for you. So I guess that's to say this like isn't going to be a silver bullet, and that we're still going to get bugs of like things that people expect to work, but hopefully that we won't get bugs per shell, and like the common cases should work well.
So it sounds like the going forward for this would be let's try to use what's in Cobra 1.0 first. Let's make sure that because our goal here is to eliminate a bunch of handwritten bash, and that's our first goal. And our second goal is don't have any custom shell specific workarounds. So if we can accomplish those two things, then we're good. If we cannot accomplish those two things, then we'll go back and take another look at see if Posner can help us out there.
Is there a third item on that list to not break everyone's current bash RCs?
Definitely.
Okay.
Oh yeah, don't break their bash RCs. Like I said, don't break the current functionality in completions. But you're right. That's another one too. Don't cause them to have to do something manual. And that, because if they use multiple versions of kubectl too, maybe not a lot of people do that, but definitely if you're going from the older version to a newer version and have to worry about whether your bash RC is set up right, that would be weird.
It's not just that. It's most package managers will write that out to a directory. So I know if you brew install kubectl, it writes out the kubectl completion bash to like whatever shared directory there is in like usual local share or something.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Brian, thing from the sourcing approach you showed, and this may work and it may not, like I can't tell from what it generates, but like when you switch clusters, for instance, it's like hopefully it gets the completions for whatever cluster it's talking to, right? Like going back to the CRD thing. So like I don't think this is urgent, but like as we just look and we're evaluating just for like our own context, it's probably worth just doing a check to see like does that sourcing shell out enough dynamic stuff to the command, to the kube control command itself, such that it will get the CRDs like when it will like does it find the list of CRDs like when you source it, and then so that's your list of CRDs like for as long as the shell is open, right? Or does it change on each one? And there's optimizations there, right? Like one's not necessarily the right one because maybe you don't want the completion hitting the CRDs each time and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I mean, I want to say that, I mean, I do that. I switch clusters a lot and haven't noticed that it doesn't pick up the right completions, but I don't, now I'm thinking about it, I don't know, maybe I'm usually opening a new shell when I do that, but I'll check it and see.
Cool. It's not critical, but it would allow us to preemptively file a, FAQ rather than waiting till someone files an issue if it's known.
So this is an interesting point, by the way. So I see that in some cases we want, for example, discovery to be cached, but cleared between switching contexts. But in some cases, when we auto-completing pods, we probably want to do this auto-completion dynamically every time, or not? What do you think?
My guess is like if we might be able to get this from the Open API, for instance, because the Open API, like if the Open API exists for CRDs and if that information was part of the Open API, I'm not sure that it is, but we could put it in there, for instance. The Open API is cached. So is the discovery service. So like ideally, we would just get it from an existing cached piece of metadata that kube control fetches anyway when it's going to run git or some other command. But it's possible that we would have to add like pieces of metadata to the cached information, which is what we're talking about is like basically a lot of work for a porcelain auto completion. So I'm guessing that none of us here on this call would prioritize it unless we felt really strongly about it, but we could at least create the issue so that someone from the community could pick it up if it was important to them. Does that kind of address what you were saying?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you.
So does Knight is work. I see they commented like 4 and 8 hours ago, so I haven't caught up on the issue, but it sounds like Knight wants to be working on this, right? We just got to point them in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we landed on is let's just go with the Cobra piece. It's going to absolutely be an improvement. And it's not going to be like, quarters of work. We'll probably learn something. Like if it's not ideal and we want to change it, we'll have a much better idea of why and be able to go from there. But there's like a really good chance. Like I'd put it 80%, like this is good and we stick with it. And 20%, like at some point down the road, we do something different. Or Cobra 1.0 just improves their capabilities.
I wish we had Mark here as well. Maybe we should. It sounds like Mark is chiming in on this thread. Maybe we need to sync with Mark as well, because I'm sure that he'll want to do the same solution for Helm if we're going to be upgrading Cobra.
I mean, he already did it in Helm.
Oh, he already upgraded to the
Yeah.
latest Cobra? Oh.
Yeah. And I think that's what drove him to fix some of the issues as well.
So I think the answer is the direction we'd give Knight 42 is to try and follow the approach Helm took, use the Cobra 1.0 supported completion. That means you're going to end up deleting a ton of code in custom completion, and that's intentional. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, Brian, do you want to respond on this issue, or would you like me to do it?
No, I can respond and
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you. You don't have to do it now. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. All right. Moving on to kubeconfig D.
So this is another one that
Okay.
came up in the bug scrub. It's a feature request. It's been open since December 2018. And we added it to the agenda, I believe, to get discussion on if it's something we wanted to have. Sounds like Ben the Elder wants it because he froze the issue.
Does he still want it?
He froze the issue on June 25th.
Okay.
Does anyone have any feelings or thoughts on adding a kubeconfig./config.d directory? So I get context for in Unix philosophy, if you have a config.d folder, whatever is the program, it will source everything in that config.d folder, including overrides. I think it prioritizes overrides, right? But someone is asking for that inside kube control.
So that would then, so it'd source maybe alphabetically or something like that, all the different files there, and then override kubeconfig entries. Is that the intended behavior?
I don't know if they mentioned anything about overriding. I think that, so I believe the context on this one is if you have a program that generates kube configs, it's much easier to ship them out into a directory than to slurp up the current one and merge the YAML and write out a new one.
So when Brian Grant replied on this issue, he pointed out there was 5 or 6 different previous issues, and there's a lot of history. So it may not be as simple as just a brand new. It has other consequences, and especially since there's going to be a lot of other libraries, client Go, that rely on a particular parsing of kubeconfig. This is a much larger issue than just SIG CLI.
I think the point, right, is if, does client Go, client Go, you give it a kubeconfig file, right? So now would this only work for kube control? Or also, would it work for all CLIs that use the CLI utils?
Client Go it has the different loading methods, right? It's been a while since I looked at that code, but it will load, it has an abstraction for the config, and it will load it from an environment variable. It'll load it from, this is pretty closely tied, honestly, to the base64 one that we talked about. I don't know if everyone saw that one, but someone wanted to be able to set a base64 encoded environment variable for CI/CD. So you could easily set a kube config through an environment variable, which is a totally reasonable request. Let me see if I can find that issue. I feel like that's the same amount of work to tweak these two things.
Right. Once you're in there, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, my worry is that we'll have to get consensus, not just amongst ourselves, but amongst everyone. Because I think that kubeconfig parsing and merging stuff, I think that happens all the way down at client Go or close to it. Maybe it's in the resource builder, but there's the factory that we use, it's actually in the CLI runtime, I think, staging, CLI runtime, where the factory does the kube config parsing stuff.
So there's like there's two positions one could take on this, right? Like the first is you don't want this actually in the low level abstraction that client Go uses, right? Because you could introduce a bug, you could introduce like you're basically introducing change to and complexity for that would impact controllers, right? And the controller manager and parts of the system that like you just really want to minimize risk on. So they shouldn't get it. And this would only be a CLI thing, right? And maybe like Helm would pick it up if Helm used the CLI utils and could take advantage of it or something like that, if they happen to be hooking in at the right library, but would really just be CLIs. Then the alternative suggestion, right, is like, well, now we're fragmenting the way that you can specify auth and right, and so then I run kube builder, right, and kube control get works, but kube builder, doesn't work, right, and why is that? And now I'm confused and file an issue. And I think I'd be more in line with the former, which is just make like, this is just for kube control and maybe like other CLIs that want the same behavior, like just providing it for that context seems like a better trade-off than impacting a bunch of other components that this may not be a great thing for.
Does the kubeconfig environment variable not live as part of that?
The kubeconfig environment
It is
variable
part
is the
of that
path,
whole-
right, to the kubeconfig.
It's one or multiple
There's
paths.
code in that same place under the CLI runtime and that factory kube config, if I remember correctly. All of that merging and the different priorities of kube config and the environment variable and merging different versions or different ones, different kube config files, all that happens in one place in the CLI runtime, if I remember correctly.
Well, one way we could do this, right, is we could make, if we were to do this, we could do it as an alpha feature, right? And so we could flag guard it, and then we could enable it and saying like, enable config, like kubeconfig D as a flag, and then that would allow like folks who have control over their system to take advantage of it, right? And it would mean like integrations like Spinnaker and like if Helm and like all the other systems that shell out to it or use these libraries either through executing kube control or through Go modules would not be impacted, which is I think is what we'd want, right? When we roll it out, it would be opt-in, and then we could evaluate at that point in time if we wanted to, make it the default behavior or just leave it as it is, or decide that there's bugs. Like we could discover that like actually merging these things is difficult because the merge keys for the entries in the kube config are ambiguous, and having multiple files has led to having cluster and context mismatches in weird ways that cause user like you could imagine like that sort of us encountering that sort of bug in the future, and so we could decide to discontinue the feature or something like that as well.
So would you say that the config.d directory is totally separate than doing the base64 encoded kubeconfig? Because I think that one should live wherever the kubeconfig environment variable lives.
I don't know. It depends on where the kubeconfig environment variable is. Like, and there's like two like hats. Like one is like, what is the optimal structure of the code, right? And like logically, how should these things live together? And then the second is like, how do we target like thinly only the binaries that we control and not like inadvertently impact other components, right? And so those two might not actually be aligned. So I don't know the answer to your question, I guess is my response.
Eddie, can I ask a question? Why is I couldn't understand the need for the base64 support when let's say there is a command to actually pipe it directly in as a file using the normal environment variable.
I think it's more for like CI/CD pipelining, where you just really want to go paste in a base64 string in a a config page somewhere, as opposed to having to add a step to write out a file to disk. Does that
So
make
can't
sense?
let me type in the chat. Can't I do this? Can I just basically set an environment variable called kubeconfig, and then I'm missing a smaller than sign there before the parentheses, but I can just dump the environment variable and decode it. I don't think we should probably try to reinvent this if this is already there, right?
So
I thought kubeconfig was the path.
yeah, I thought
Yeah,
kubeconfig was
it
path.
is. So sorry, let me repaste the correct one. So if you do this, you're gonna get something like this. You're gonna get a file descriptor, and in that case, that's a file.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you do this, I don't think you need an actual like. I mean, it's something that POSIX provides for us, so we don't need to actually reinvent this.
Yeah. I guess that's actually really awesome. If I was to think where might not this work, like if you're on Spinnaker and Spinnaker had a form and they're like, here's an environment variable, then like would Spinnaker allow you to express it in this way where you write it to where it gives you a file descriptor?
Well, if I'm the person configuring the CI/CD environment, I will probably set it this way. And as Spinnaker developers, if they support Kubernetes natively, they can support it this way too. The problem here actually would be rereading the file, which is not possible because it's a pipe and you can only read it once, and you cannot write into it. And we tend to sometimes write back into the kubeconfig file, and those will be the problems that I can see happening. I would say this is like definitely a more exotic use case because you can always like get the environment variable from the user, dump it into a temporary file, and then point to it too, right? I mean, I'm actually going to come back to the other point. I would like to provide my opinion about the kubeconfig. Right now, far too many binaries have this already pre-compiled into them. Like the kubeconfig resolution steps are pretty hard-coded. So now imagine I'm coming to kubecontrol. It recognizes the config, and then I go to another program, which I know used to work with kubecontrol just fine. So now that, let's say I run a destructive action there without knowing that that thing does not support config, so I accidentally target the wrong cluster, right? Like kubecontrol plugins alone probably have at least 50, 60 of them at this point have that, existing resolution mechanism already hard-coded into them. Like it's built into the binary. So it'll be like a little Franken feature if you do this, because half of the time it won't work the way users expect.
And that's true for essentially any new capability we add to how we do auth, right? Like if we add the capability, some existing program doesn't have that capability compiled in and will not recognize it, right? So like you're definitely right. We'd have to look at, would we fail, or are we more likely to fail, or are we like more likely to like just silently use the existing context or something like that, right? So like I think that's a really good point, right? Like if we were to merge the default context, like you wouldn't want to like change the default context in merging, right? Because exactly like you say, that would that would result in maybe a non-failure case where it would just continue to work after you merged, but in the wrong context. Versus if you didn't merge like the default context, but maybe you just added so you can imagine like if you don't do overrides but you add additional context, then the end result would simply be that like the plugin would not have certain like context in its config thought, and then you'd get like a failure. right? And then I guess that's another reason where like the flag, right? So like if you have to enable this with a flag, then like if the plugin is only accepting flags that are valid, then it would fail, for instance, right? So
Yeah, that's true.
I think there's like but that's an excellent point about like looking at the like how can a user delete all their production workloads by accident, right, or something like that. Like that's always the fun one to explore, and there is a path there where that's possible.
I have a similar concern, but into in a bit different flavor. I don't know about other people, but my day-to-day workflow quite often looks like use client Go to do something in my code base, and then verify it with kubectl. And I'm a bit concerned that if we make this feature only kubectl feature, then I will get inconsistent results. So this will be very confusing, I think. So, I mean, in the beginning, we will have a feature flag which will require me to opt in. But eventually, I imagine we will remove this feature flag and make this behavior default. So once we have it as a default, I think it will be quite confusing.
Or maybe then the answer is this could never be the default until we did like kubecontrol 2.0 and like just wipe the slate clean or something like that. And it goes back to like the motivation, right, for like the actual consumers that really want this thing, right? Is this because they have their own bespoke system, right, and they control kubecontrol and they control that flag and they're writing out these kube configs? Or is it because is it they just want this in Spinnaker? Maybe an alternative, right, too, is that we could simulate this, right, in a second. We could actually create a second command when I think about it, right, that like took a kubeconfig.d directory and then merged all that into a kubeconfig file, doing the overrides, right? So like if it's like, hey, what the experience you want as an end user is to be able to write these things out to a config.d directory, we'd say, okay, you can write them out to config.d directory, but before you, after you write them out, you need to run this command, which will then like merge them into the kubeconfig file, and then you get backwards compatibility with everything else. And it's kind of on you to make sure that you're getting the behavior you want based on how you run those commands.
We already have that functionality actually with environment variables. You can set a list of paths separated by colons for kubeconfig, and then there's a flatten and merge command that'll write that out to one file for you.
It writes it out to one file for you?
It will, yeah, it can shit out the YAML and then you just pipe it to a file. But we have a command that will do the merge. Yeah.
Okay, maybe can we just respond on the issue that like, can you do this? Like, does this address the issue for you? And then we can like explain all the challenges with it's not going to work for plugins. It's the failure case for plugins is suspect.
Funny enough, I think we can actually make the plugins work much better than out of 3 binaries, because we call the plugins, so we can detect there's a confd directory, and then we can merge it into again like either an in-memory pipe or a temporary file, and then we can basically hack up a new kubeconfig environment variable that is column separated, and then we can pass that to the plugin. I mean, we can still respect to the user's preference, but it seems that for plugins at least, we can hack this much better than other out of band binaries.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We'd have to be careful about like I don't know enough about this to know like what the permissions on those files are. like on the pipe if it's only readable by the same user or something like that. Hopefully it is.
Yeah. I think
Pasted
so.
a Stack Overflow answer. It's just kube control config view dash dash flatten, and that will squish all those together in one config. Funny enough, right below it, there's a plug for a kube control plugin that will do this for you. So
Okay, so maybe we should just like paste this answer in. I can just write the response.
okay, so you'll handle responding to the config.d, and then Amit, do you want to respond to the base64 one, or would you like me to?
I already did.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We get to have a nice deep discussion on all these topics, which is a nice luxury today. All right, Sean, you're up.
Okay, so recently, some senior members of the Kubernetes project, Tim Hawken and Daniel Smith, this came up and they asked for SIG CLI input, and they included me, and I wanted to bring it to the community. And it's basically there were some instances where kube control apply was happening during the deletion of the same resource. And so so Antoine was also brought into this, and there's actually a pretty straightforward way to address this. If we and everybody who's been involved in it so far assumes that this is something that if we can stop it, we should stop it. At least the default should be that you shouldn't try to apply something that's in the process of being deleted. And Daniel suggested that if you null out the deletion timestamp in the apply, that when you apply, because of the immutability of that timestamp, the API server would reject and return an error if the deletion timestamp was set on the version in the API server. And because of that, you're basically blocking an apply during the deletion by nulling out the deletion timestamp before applying. Does that scenario make sense?
What happens with field ownership in that case? Like, does it mean that you will claim, if you set it to null, does it like mean you don't own that field, or does it mean you do own that field? And does it do anything?
Yeah, so we wouldn't be putting it in the, I'm guessing the implementation is it wouldn't be putting it in the last applied annotation. It would happen like directly before sending, and so it wouldn't be encoded in the last applied annotation. At least I would imagine that that's the case. And
there's also the field owner.
Yeah, so
like
that's going to be
server-side apply.
Yeah. So yeah, my answer was for the client side. Server side, I haven't actually thought about it, but I'm imagining you don't want to claim ownership over it. In fact, I don't think that anyone can actually claim ownership over it, since it's I don't know that you can actually. It's possible. I'll look into that. So, but that's a good question. That I'm sorry I don't have the answer for you right now. But I wanted to bring this topic up to the community here to see if we're comfortable with that. And I think that there's already efforts underway to implement this. Even though it's not under the kube control repo, it's in the Kubernetes repo, and I have the link there in that, that link.
I'm actually like, sorry, what's being implemented, like the workaround of setting null, is that supported today, like that just works today, and we're creating something different, or is and we're talking about
this would be so I believe that there are maybe Antoine and others who are implementing right now, and I don't have the links to that, this change, which would set the deletion timestamp to null before applying. And then,
automatically.
yeah, and then it would, and I don't know exactly how this mechanism would work, but it would understand the error code that says, that the deletion timestamp field was immutable, and you tried to change it, and would give a error message to the user saying you're trying to apply a resource that's already been deleted.
What happens if we use customize to just set a deletion timestamp equals null patch on everything? Like, I'm just curious, like today, like, because then it could kind of like give us some information on how well this works, right? Because that would then patch like every single resource that was sent to look effectively like the change we were planning on making in kube control.
Yeah, I'll have let me put that down as something to try here.
And then I guess my other question is, like, if this, depending on how we're talking about implementing this, like, we're talking about server-side apply, right? And, controllers calling server-side apply, and like the notion that like you don't have to do it from the Go code in order to update it. But if we're putting on the client side this, functionality, it seems like we're creeping back into the world where it's like, well, the only real way to apply a resource is from the Go code, because there's like these 4 other fields that you have to set in order to not get your, run into these 3 edge cases in there. And I'm not saying like I'm fundamentally opposed, right? Like, I think we need to be practical and just try and prevent as many bugs from impacting as many users as possible. But we should, think, I guess, make that a conscious decision to say that this is going to mean that you cannot simply call the apply API. You have to do it correctly, which is a little bit complicated. Like, other clients can set this field too, right? It's not like the end of the world, but as this grows, there's going to be a doc, right, that says like, here's the fields you need to set or something like that.
Okay, yeah, I could bring these issues. I'll try to incorporate these concerns back into the issue to make sure that they're more widely disseminated. I think that hopefully we will come to a thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not we approve of this. I don't know if we want to come to that thumbs up or thumbs down right now.
You mean like right now?
I mean, I know that we're just dropping this in our laps, but eventually, once these PRs start dropping, there's going to be a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not we should go this route.
Well, we got 5 minutes left. Sorry, we should have probably done this one at the beginning, just because it's probably the one with the most severe consequences of making the wrong decision.
Okay, yeah, we don't have to do it now. Although, like I said, so this isn't this isn't somebody who doesn't really know the Kubernetes system. This is Tim Hawken and Daniel Smith and Antoine. So I don't think it's something we can dismiss as peripheral. I think it's I think it's something that, we'll actually have to have a thumbs up and a thumbs down on. And I think, as I said, I think that there's already efforts underway, and so yeah, I think that relatively soon we'll have to give our
Like,
answer.
is there more context than what's in this issue?
There was an email thread, and I should have. I thought that a lot of that stuff was going to be in the issue when Antoine created it, and I'll have to try to dig up that. Yeah, sorry if sorry for it seems like I didn't do all of my homework here. It seems, but judging by the questions, I haven't really presented this as well as I should have to the community. Apologies. I'll try to individually get back to you, Phil, on more context.
Yeah, no
And
problem. I mean, I think this is, like, from a high level, this seems right, but it seems like there's a lot of edge cases that are just not explored, at least in the description of the issue. And it would be great to capture those. Like, for instance, if I want to delete and recreate a delete and recreate a thing, like, what does that workflow look like and what's going to happen? And I'm guessing, like, what happens, right, is you delete it, then it would be like going through some deletion, and the next apply would fail, and then at some point the thing actually gets deleted, and then finally the apply succeeds. So you'd like have to rerun apply, which seems like a fine case. It seems like the behavior we want. What happens if you're applying like 5 resources, and the one in the middle has this? Do we want to fail up front, or try and detect this if we can up front, or is it fine to delete in the middle? I'm not sure that, like, the way we fail on other things is we just kind of fail in the middle, unfortunately. So that seems fine for now, and we can defer saying, like, let's try and dry run everything first, like, to later or something like that. I'd like to, clearly call out that, like, deletion timestamp will not be part of the last applied annotation and will not be part of the field owners, if that is in fact the design. Like to call out that this, like, how is this going to impact, like, controllers written with controller runtime? Will that be built into those libraries as well? Is it being done at a layer where, like, is it being done in a low-level layer like client Go, where it just automatically will get applied to everything you call when you call apply, or is this only impacting kubecontrol apply?
I think that this is only kubecontrol apply. Or at least that was let me rephrase that. What Daniel was suggesting was just kubecontrol.
And is that because it's an intentional decision and we want controllers to have the old behavior? Or is that because it's easier to do that way? Or is it because we didn't think of it?
I think it's because in order to not change the behavior of the current controllers and have to deal with an extra error, although that's my guess.
So these are just some of the questions I have. Like, I don't, like, if this seems like it's a good workaround, and if we can address edge cases and replace them with intentional failures, that makes sense to me. But I would like to see captured, like, either in a markdown file or like some more expansive description, the like just some of these cases for my own context. Like it would be ideal if we could have, like, I think actually like a document maybe in the SIG CLI where we can point people to, like, fact about apply, or so you want to do apply, because I think this will impact server-side apply. Like I was saying, like if someone wants to use server-side apply and now they need to set this field, right? They should probably be aware of that.
Yeah, so if they wanted this behavior of receiving an error, if they're trying to apply something that's in the process of being deleted, this is how you do it. You set this deletion timestamp to null. And you will, and in the process, you'll receive an error that looks exactly like this.
Right, that'd be helpful. Maybe in the existing apply document as well. So maybe the server-side apply document should be updated with that, or whatever it is. But great, good fix. It's really nice to be tackling this edge case, and it's great that there's a solution that can, seems relatively conservative in its risk profile.
Okay, it looks like I have some AIs here, and it looks like we're also over time. Sorry about that. I guess we're not
No,
going to get this.
that's great. Okay, I think that's all the items. So I think just to close this one out, let's go ahead and move forward with this, but let's also make sure that we kind of have captured the state in some document to try and talk through all the edge cases and make sure everyone agrees and shares the same view of exactly what the new behavior will be. And it looks like it's enabled by a flag by default, so that's actually very conservative, right? There should be no impact to existing users, but we probably want to get this out of a flag as soon as possible if it's, addressing a real use case, so that all the systems that shell out to kube control are getting the most correct behavior that we can provide them by default.
Cool. I'll try to circle back with you, Phil, since you had a lot of good feedback on this.
Right on. All right, I think we're over time, but is there? Oh, there's stand-ups. Crew Kui, do you guys still want to do the stand-ups? I'm happy to stick around for a bit if you all would like to do those anyway.
I'm okay just leaving it as a point of record, and we can cover it next time.
Okay.
Chris Kim called out in the chat that he had to leave early, but if anyone wants to play with custom index stuff for Crew, hit him up on Slack. He's just Chris Kim, I believe.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending, and look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks or so.
Thanks a lot, Phil.